Now let's talk about motivation and taking action. I would like to start with talking about the importance of these two things, how they correlate to each other. So let's do that first. Taking action is important in the sense that you need to be able to do things when you don't feel like it. You need to be able to start doing techniques or habits that you don't want to do simply because they improve you or they work towards a certain goal that you want to achieve. And motivation is important in the sense that you need to learn how to stop relying on motivation. Motivation is the main feeling we rely on when we want to start doing something. It's the main reason why we procrastinate, because we don't feel motivated. So you need to learn how to stop relying on motivation and effortlessly do things even if you don't feel like doing them. So, in order to start understanding this, let's first talk about what motivation even is. So, usually we believe that when we want to start doing an action and we want to find motivation for it, there's a cycle that we follow, or rather, a certain order that we follow. And this order usually we think goes like inspiration. We watch something, we hear something, someone says something, it inspires us, and that inspiration leads to motivation towards that thing, and then we're motivated to do the thing. That makes it easier to take action, so that is what leads to the action. Usually we think that this goes in a linear path, that this is the only way this thing goes: inspiration, motivation, action. But what we need to understand is that these three things actually move in a cycle, and you can start anywhere at the cycle in order to eventually reach at action. So, for example, you don't need to rely on inspiration to gain motivation. You don't need to rely on motivation to start taking action. Now, the thing is that two of these things are quite out of control for us, except during very specific situations. And these two things, of course, are inspiration and motivation. We don't know when we will randomly get hit with a burst of motivation. We don't know when we will watch something inspiring. So, the only thing that we can immediately control for the thing that we're trying to do is taking action for it. And so, you're like, what are you saying? You just said that if you don't want to do something, just do it. Well, that is important too. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you want to do a big task, like write a huge essay, then you don't need to start with directly writing that essay. Neither do you need to start with looking for motivation to start writing it. Just start with any small action. Start doing some chore that you've been delaying, like cleaning your bed or doing the dishes or vacuuming the floor. Start with that and let that action roll into psychological momentum for you to start doing the big thing. That is how most techniques work that talk about delaying procrastinating and start taking action. They rely on psychological motivation, and the most reliable way to use the psychological motivation is just getting up and taking action for something small, and then using the momentum you get to start that big thing. And usually it becomes much easier to start it. Now, the next technique that I read about a while ago that has unexpectedly helped me a lot is just counting to three. So, for example, you're watching a series and you're like, oh, I gotta do that assignment, it's due tomorrow, but you can't get yourself to stand up from your couch or put your phone or laptop away. You just want to continue watching. Just count to three and get up and do the thing. Now, again, I know that sounds kind of crazy. How would that work? You're literally just counting to three. How would something so simple be so effective and deal with such a big problem? I was skeptical of it too first, but again, this helped me quite a bit. Just counting to three and doing this thing unexpectedly helped me a lot. It was not as reliable and did not have as high of a success rate as the last thing I talked about, which is taking action for something small, but it did take less time, certainly, and it was much easier, certainly. And I think this exploits the same thing that I talked about earlier, the same thing that works for the other technique, psychological momentum. So when you count to three, your brain basically has started doing something, and it's something easy, so your brain believes that what you're doing after this will probably be easy too. So when you start something in your head, it's much easier to continue that cycle rather than abruptly stopping it. And if you're really intent on doing that, like if you're thinking of writing an essay, then usually counting to three and continuing that cycle by going to do that thing will be quite easy, or much easier than just forcing yourself to go do that. And yeah, those are the two things that have helped me the most. Not relying on inspiration or motivation, because honestly, motivation is very unreliable, but it is also a finite resource. So it eventually runs out and it needs to be refueled. So, for example, if you force yourself to do some work and you're fighting all the urges to check your phone or to go to sleep or things like that, that ability to be able to resist those things will eventually run out, because essentially what you're using there is motivation to complete your work, motivation to not use those things. But again, motivation is a finite resource, it eventually ends. So you'll eventually give in to those temptations if you don't let your motivation refuel. And how do you let your motivation refuel? It's simple. You just use it when you really have to. You just use it when you're taking big steps for something and you need motivation in the moment. Apart from that, things like studying, you build a routine for them, so that you do them effortlessly and you aren't wasting any motivation on that. So, that being said, let's talk a little bit more about procrastination. And with this, let's talk about why we should not procrastinate work. And I would like to use an analogy to explain this. I'm sure you may have heard of this before, which is about eating the big frog first, something like that. But the way I have heard it and the way that has helped me understand it the most is, what if you had a frog you had to eat every day? You had no choice, you have to eat it every day, but it's really slimy, it feels really bad in your throat, it gives you a stomachache, you don't like it at all, you don't want to eat it. Then you realize you have an option to move that frog to the next day, but then the problem is the next day you have to eat 2 frogs, and then you can move those 2 frogs, but the third day you have to eat 3 frogs. And you keep on doing this because you don't like the feeling of a frog being in your mouth until you reach the end of the month, and now there are 30 frogs that you have to eat. And that's when you realize, oh no, I need to end this, it will be so hard if have to eat more frogs in the future. So you down all those frogs and then you feel really, really, really horrible, the worst you've ever felt in your life, and everything is just painful and you hate it. You hate the situation you're in, you hate the fact that you didn't eat the frogs before. And this comes in line with a lot of things that we do in real life. For example, studying for an exam. So instead of studying for the exam early, what do? Most of you usually study the night before, and you pick up the book at like 8 in the night, and while you're studying it you realized, oh no, there's actually a lot of stuff I need to cover, a lot of things that I should have studied earlier but I didn't. I might be screwed now. And then of course you force yourself to study and get through the exam, but you don't do as well as you wanted to, and you realize that you could have done much better if you just studied for 5 or 10 minutes every day instead of studying for 7 hours on the last day. So basically consistency is key, not how much you do it but how often you do it. And yeah, so instead of delaying something difficult to the end of its due date, it's always much better to do that thing first. Another reason for this is because if you don't, then that thing will constantly be in your mind, like, there was that thing that I had to do, I haven't done it yet, I'll do it tomorrow. But still, whenever you're spending time with friends, doing something else instead of doing that thing, the only thing your mind will be occupied with, or it will at least stay in your back of your head, is worry about what if you don't complete that thing, and then you have to face the consequences. And that really takes away from you being able to fully experience life, to fully be present in one moment, to give someone your full attention. And that is just not a way to live life. So there are a lot of downsides to leaving work down to the last moment, and a lot of upsides to doing it a bit earlier, even if you do just a little bit every day. Not only all the benefits that I mentioned earlier, but it will also give you a sense of fulfillment, because you'll know that you're doing slightly more than you should. You're doing slightly more than everyone else. So there are a lot of benefits to do big work earlier instead of leaving it for the end, and especially doing the big work first before any small work. Because, for example, if you have a very long project to complete and you have some small amount of maths homework, people think that if they do the maths homework first, because it'll be better, because they'll have the momentum and they can move on to the project and they can feel fulfilled and happy about completing at least the maths homework. But that really does not work in their favor. Then people mostly either stop doing the project halfway through or really struggle with completing it. It becomes much easier if you just finish the project first, and then you feel much more fulfillment than completing that small homework. And the small homework feels so small and easy in comparison to what you just completed. So like, I completed such a big project, I can easily finish this, and that works much more better. That is how you should structure your content, what content you study, and how you work, how you do things. And that being said, I would like to talk about one last thing, which is taking responsibility, which I think connects very deeply to taking action. And what I mean by this is, taking responsibility basically means like taking 100 responsibility for everything that you see in your life, not just what happens in your life, but what you see in your life. And while this will be difficult at first, it has so many benefits to it. Like, if you see someone struggling in something that you could do, just go lend them a hand. And guess what? Research has shown that performing kind acts for others gives you so much happiness, even more happiness than the person you're performing the kind act for. Because you just get a sense of fulfillment, a sense of purpose, that you're adding something to someone's life other than yourself, and things like that. So taking responsibility really helps you feel fulfilled, and it can most of the times help other people feel good too. And taking responsibility for all the small things, like if you see a bottle that is not full in your grandma's room, instead of waiting for your mom or your maid to come fill it, you go fill it yourself. So this helps with not only you building up discipline and further honing that skill of taking action, especially not when you don't feel like it, but certain situations can have a lot of other benefits, and all of these benefits while also improving discipline for you. That's just great. There's no reason not to do it apart from your own feelings, which after you do this for long enough, you will be able to overcome those too, and again, this will become just natural to do. And another tip that I would like to give you is to note down every one of these things that you do. Like, if you take responsibility for someone else or something important, just write down into a diary or on a piece of paper or into your notes app at the end of the day. Hey, today I took action about this thing even though I didn't want to. Today I took responsibility for this thing even though I was not required to. Because that really helps you look back and feel proud of yourself, while also making those things into a habit, because now there is sort of a scoreboard for what you've done, and we humans are competitive in nature. So when we see, oh, I did this yesterday, you at least want to do one thing today as well. If not that, then you usually want to do two things today just to beat what you did yesterday. So it's very important to note things down physically, so where you can see them visually. So it kind of creates a scoreboard, gives you more motivation to do that thing. It just overall helps in whatever you are trying to improve. And finally, I want to give you an exercise. Right now, just go do a chore you've been avoiding. Go make your bed, go do the dishes, clean the house, go give someone water that may need it in your house, perform a kind act for someone. Just do something right now. Take action for something that you were not planning to do. If your bed already looks nice, just make it look 10% better. Do anything. And you may think that, oh, this is under you don't need to do such a small thing, it's not going to contribute to the skill at all. That's your ego talking. You don't realize how far you've fallen on the skill. You don't realize that you need to start with such small actions if you want to build back up on that skill. You can't directly go and start doing something big that you've been procrastinating for a long time, because you don't have the skill required to do that right now when you don't feel like it. So you need to start very small. The bar has dropped way lower than you can imagine. So you need to learn how to let that ego go and start doing these small things whenever you don't feel like it. And that is it. But what I said before, I mean that. If you haven't yet, pause the video right now and go do something you were not planning to do. Do 10 push-ups, make the bed, help someone, tell your mom you love her, anything. But that is it for this topic, motivation and taking action. This is very important. Keep in mind whatever I just told you, and the procrastination tips earlier. Be sure to put them into use for anything that you try to do in life, because they can greatly help with taking action and even improving your skill of taking responsibility. And yep, that's it. Now let's move on to talking about the most important topic in this course, mental health.